Hello everyone and welcome to the final matchup of our group stage for our 1v1 final Winter Cup. This is between DeathTacticus and Rhahi, and we are on Io, DT's choice. We have a power colony this time with a garage, double price power to start, so that's always fun. What are our options for founding? You don't want to go Nomad with the $200 electronics. Does not meld well with the high power price. What other options are there? There's probably a scientist somewhere. There's some decent basalt here. Ice isn't great, but it's workable. You can also just go robot on one of those too, I guess. You're gonna have to use basalt basically though. Alright, Rhahi disagreeing with me, going for the iron robot instead. Not quite sure what the advantage of that found is to something closer to basalt, but we'll just have to see. She is picking up that early carbon. Going to be some nice fuel money off of that. But DT going into the 4 steel. Probably looking for a very quick transition into the nuclear power. DT as a scientist on this patch also getting that free goon to start. Just makes for a very easy, quick power play. We'll have to see how Rhahi will deal with that, because it's gonna be a big thing. See, DT now going for 2 claims somewhere far, far away on aluminum. That is something I see a lot of these days. This game in particular makes some amount of sense as a sort of plan for transparent aluminum, quicker upgrades, and then eventually space elevators. DT going into that patent lab. So right away that is just very clearly the plan. What this does mean is that DT has given up the goon squad that would have been easily on his steel. Also means that since he's auto-selling steel like crazy to be able to afford the chemicals, well, he already has superconductor, that he's going to have trouble. He still needs to pick up this goon, needs to get down those nuclear plants, and good luck. Superconductor, if he can get that done in time and all set up, will be nice. Rhahi, unfortunately, not really set up to get into power immediately yet. Right, yeah. Interesting. DT scrapping out of the steel, probably planning to move into... might have been glass and might have been nuclear. Either way, Rhahi EMPing it right away. And now DT's not making any money, bringing in an absurd amount of debt through all the shipping, and not really going anywhere. Rhahi really should not be auto-selling this fuel with this ridiculous amount of freighters flying through the air. Just losing a lot of extra money doing that, although she is trying to bring together the steel as quickly as possible, taking the upgrade with it instead of moving into power, which is almost $300 at this point. Not sure I agree with that decision.
The black market is online.
Going for another EMP, freezing the power. Very nice. Very necessary with that superconductor. But diminishing returns are going to start affecting this, and once they do, DT is going to start running that superconductor nuclear power, and there's very little Rhahi can do about that. Getting a geotherm up right now, but that's not going to be enough power, and it's not going to come up quick enough to really stall out this play from DT. Really just the 2 big mistakes right now, taking the upgrade instead of going to power and continually selling this fuel down. Let's look at this, 2.4 fuel a second. Fuel could be probably up at $150, $200 by now. I mean, yes, That maybe leads DT to turn off the aluminum, but that also just slows him down later. Anyway, trading off that. Ooh, not a good. Well, it's actually an okay trade for Rhahi, since this is the only completed nuclear plant, and that is a superconductor nuclear plant. DT is still getting more power out of it, but also it's okay. I think that works out fine for Rhahi. She did get those 2 other nuclear plants down, leveraging that very heavy steel production. Also have to wonder a bit about the placement of this patent lab. If it's going to be gooned anyway, it could pretty much have just been placed right here and had some adjacency potential later. Not a big deal though. And it could just become some other advanced building before too long. DT making a lot of power money. No big surprise there. That is what happens when you go for a superconductor play and don't get stopped in time. Trading EMPs, DT clearly comes out ahead because he still has this mutiny. And also because, again, diminishing returns. This EMP is going to last a lot longer. Rhahi has bought into some fuel, or at least stopped auto-selling it, and that was nice. But just still so much money passed up there. DT without a very good way to deal with that. Going to this medium carbon now. Rhahi should look to nuke that as soon as possible. And that would all be very nice. What else are we looking at this game? There is plenty of ice around, so that's not going to be a problem. Getting into water will be interesting soon, but realistically DT still does need to get this carbon pulled in, needs to get those ions up before water is even an option. You can't ship it in, no pirates or magnetic storms. So that part, at least, is very nice for him, but he'll probably want to get that connected up anyway, maybe, if he can spare the claims, just so he can get the superconductor bonus on the water processors as well. Okay, Goon Squad bought, not placed.
A scientific HQ has been upgraded.
Yeah, at this point, DT down quite a bit on cash, but yeah, once Rhahi upgrades, that evens out a bit. And one of the big things DT has going for him is this huge aluminum stockpile. It just effectively makes his upgrades a lot cheaper. Glass is going to be a nice market for him. He's going to keep one superconductor nuclear plant down, just to make sure nothing goes horribly wrong. Rhahi, okay, is going to get out of her nuclear plants. Works out nicely. She still has the geotherm to keep her in solid position on power. Going into a lot of electronics, though, is a bit interesting to me. I'm not quite sure. I guess it makes some sense. Rhahi going into those assault platforms, and that's why she's out of iron entirely. Might have been more interesting, perhaps, to see a little extra steel at the moment. So electronics aren't all that great. They're more or less on par with steel. But she's going to need a lot more steel than electronics. So it feels like something that could have been done. DT already going for this space elevator. Electronics mildly expensive, but not all that expensive. And again, that early aluminum really playing into that. Just did not get punished enough with the fuel. I will keep harping on that point because it was a huge deal this game. Now with this radiation storm, DT will get a lot of fuel produced, and that should make this shipment fair bit easier for a while. All very nice for him. Rhahi trying to put that patent lab up. It is frozen for the moment. What is she planning on? Liquid batteries. Always a strong pickup on IO. Oxygen already up at 150. Neither player producing any oxygen. Geothermal borehole is probably also a nice pickup eventually. Alright, Rhahi using that robot adjacency quite nicely. Moving the patent lab is interesting. I guess it allows for that extra adjacency there, although it blocks off this. The downside, of course, is this mutiny happening. It would have happened on the other tile as well, so not a big deal, but still. Rhahi has found DT's space elevator. But what is she going to do about it? There are both nukes and network viruses to break through the Goon Squad. Network viruses being the better choice. Where is this tile? Quite far off. Okay. I'm not sure why this went all this high. Both players have a lot of basalt to work with. So Rhahi already pulling in a fair amount of silicon, and DT with the option of getting a ton there. So it doesn't seem worth 32. I guess it is an ice tile as well. That helps somewhat. In any case, DT starting this buy into Rhahi, not buying into himself, interestingly. He can't quite afford to finish the buy. And I guess buying into himself wouldn't have helped much in that regard. It's basically just relying on finishing this launch regardless. But it's not going to be enough, or at least it shouldn't be. Rhahi does have enough to defend herself. And DT letting these patents finish does mean that he wasn't going to race there in time. Still, very good position for DT. He's pulling in very nice money off of the space elevator this whole time, as well as these superconductor nuke plants. And yeah, meanwhile, well, Rhahi had to spend a lot of money defending herself, and she's just falling further and further behind by the moment. Also just losing a lot of nice patents to that Unigoon.
Robotics HQ has been upgraded.
Does get up to HQ 5 at least. Both players picking up some extra ice. Always important. At this point, it's pretty hard to see where Rhahi's going to pick up the edge to get back into this game. DT does just have control of so many good patents. Geo borehole will be helpful. It's all just too little. Honestly, at this point, perpetual motion feels just like completely unnecessary. But that's fine, I guess. Rhahi going into that optimization center will be useful. There are good things to optimize: water, chems, food, oxygen, steel even. DT not going into one of those himself is one of the few weak points at the moment. Although he's going to an optimization center and not a second space elevator. Elevator is not really all that profitable at the moment. Hasn't quite been able to keep up with that fuel demand, which is why the optimization center is just so important. Also just launching the wrong thing right now. Oxygen, clearly the better launch. Are you trying to make... I thought she was trying to make a play on fuel, but apparently that price climbing is just all natural thanks to all these attacks. Alright. Also, this aluminum still. But that is what DT needs to do to get to a 700 for his second elevator. So you can't blame him too much for that. Although really, $300 a second on that fuel isn't the best. I would maybe turn this off and wait until fuel settles down a little first. But that's just me. Rhahi hacking uranium. She does have complete control of that market for the moment. DT can switch one of his basalt tiles into the basalt platform at any time, block off the iron hacks, block off the uranium hacks. But he has not done that so far. He's also pulling in the silicon, because he decided, you know, $300 worth of fuel wasn't enough, needed to add another 200 on top. I guess that's his choice. He still has a very solid lead, but you do kind of wonder. The series, this match just started, so it's still 0-0. Oh, hello, Mythic Llama. I probably shouldn't be doing this in the middle of the cast, but there's not all that much to say right now. DT just churning away on this Thinking Machine's elevator. Rhahi has gotten up a second optimization center. Hasn't really gotten much done off of these, though. First optimization being electronics always feels a little weird to me. Electronics not all that much more expensive than chems at the moment. And just there are a lot of resources that I feel make a lot more sense than the electronics ever did. But that's okay. DT going fuel made a lot of sense in the moment. I'm going into water now. Launching oxygen now finally made that switch over. Well, last launch was also oxygen. I just didn't make a note of it. Anyway, about even on cash, DT with a very solid stock lead. And it's just getting harder and harder to see a way for Rhahi to claw her way back into this.
Optimization routine successful.
I mean, one big advantage she does have, she is the robot. She does not have to consume all that little bit of extra life support. You know, that 0.8, that 1.2, that 0.4. That adds up to quite a bit of money. Like 100 there. Yeah. Rhahi kind of acknowledging that there's not all that much you can do right now, but wanting to fight this out. I can respect that. She did get rid of her hacker array at some point, it seems, which is interesting. Okay, DT has gone into those basalt platforms. I guess that does leave very little for Rhahi to actually hack. So fair enough.
Did you think we would be so easy to hoodwink?
Mutiny Goon. DT anticipating that, dropping the network virus before the counter mutiny. And he should be able to, well, he probably doesn't even need to pick it back up with his own mutiny. That only buys him an extra 20 or something, 26 or so seconds off that Thinking Machine's mutiny. For him to take the optimization center is interesting.
The engineers have advanced our production.
And I guess it's a fair choice. Again, prices are still really high. Only starting to get into chem optimizations now for both players does really make me wonder.
market is open for business.
Because they both should have known that optimizations were going to continue for some amount of time. There were just that many things to optimize. Wait, what? Okay, yeah. This nuke really probably should have landed a long time ago. And I think if it had, blocking off the access to the fuel, Rhahi would probably be in a much better position, along with the early power. Still, Life Sport may be starting to catch up to DT. Still has a very solid lead. 40k extra cash and roughly 85k of extra stock value. But there is still room for Rhahi to catch up. So we'll have to see. That was...
The black market is online.
Huh. Oh. DT picked up slant. So Rhahi had to nuke out all those tiles. Interesting little side note there. Well, that's nice that both players don't have carbon, I guess. He does at least have a huge stockpile. She might want to actually hack carbon even. Long term, that's not great for her, but does something. As for DT, I might be tempted just to drop a chem lab on top of this trace instead of just shipping in trace carbon, but it's not probably a decision that moves the needle much in either direction.
The black market is open for business.
Not really sure why both players are... I mean, Rhahi has to make steel in case she needs to make more transitions, but DT, he has nanotech. I guess it is mostly free for him, and there's not much else to do with the tiles. Still interesting. Rhahi seems to have mostly given up on attacking the space elevator. Makes sense. EMP's 30k, Uni's 40k, thinking machines. So it's just not going to accomplish all that much. Muling, carbon. Good use of that cooldown. Again, with not much else to do, that's just pulling in a solid amount of cash, even though the mule will work extremely slowly on these trace tiles. Radiation storm coming. DT did sell everything down and buying back into a few things because he is at that 100%. Rhahi finally moving back into that hacker array. Would have been nice to see a while ago, but unfortunately. Hello everyone and welcome to the final game of our final match of our 1v1 Winter Cup group stage. I am still Blues, and this is still DeathTacticus versus Rhahi. Again, we have double power price and a power colony. So, the game will likely be decided on power again, which makes this scientific pound much less interesting than it would have otherwise been. Same with this one. Maybe you want to go for a nomad here. This seems like a really good nomad. But, okay, Rhahi dropping on that quite early. That does give up the power money, but it is still just that strong. Rhahi has not bought up her electronics, so DT has beaten her there. Not sure I like that exchange for Rhahi. What she could have done instead, since this isn't an electronics colony or anything of that nature, she could have either bought into glass or bought into aluminum, both things that DT ignored for the moment in order to buy up that electronics. At least I'm pretty sure he ignored it. By the time I switched back and forth, he already had his 80 aluminum, so Could have gone either way. Either way, Rhahi just unnecessarily handing a little bit of extra cash to DT. Pulling in a ton of aluminum though, pulling in this nice water soon. I have to wonder, these were probably still protected. Let's see. Really would be looking to get into some wind soon as Rhahi. This seems like a pretty reasonable location for it. Although there are, of course, other options. Geotherms, still also a very nice option. And one thing Rhahi definitely needs to keep in mind is that if she does claim the geo, there are no more geos left on the map. So if she keeps carbon and silicon relatively high in price, which is a bit hard to do since she doesn't have money, then DT is going to have so many problems getting into power. Alright, going to wind and the geo. Getting out of the wind. Going to reactors. I'm not sure I buy that. I guess DT's also going to reactors. That cuts off his money, but Rhahi has a chance to make a lot of power, and she should do that. Alright, returning 2 claims to do that instead. Going into the solar panel, no, going in... Okay, she doesn't have enough silicon for the second solar panel, so she's going into a quarry for now. And the solar flare is pretty much going to hand things to her if nothing bad happens. Alright, DT going for the mutiny onto the geotherm instead of onto these solar flare solar panels. As long as Rhahi doesn't do anything silly like mutiny the Goond geo, she's fine, and she does not. So she should just make the lion's share of this power money. DT barely breaking even. That's what happens when you're a scientist running steel and reactors. Rhahi not actually going to make money off this, but she is going to really neutralize her starting debt disadvantage. One thing I will say about all this is that I'm not sure I like the particular way Rhahi got into power. Just using all these claim returns instead of maybe overproducing and then transitioning. But that's okay. Alright, Rhahi going to get the full benefit of the shortage since DT just upgraded. DT has completely killed the fuel market. That's one reason why you maybe shouldn't try to compete with the scientist, but I guess it's fine. Alright, now we're seeing DT getting into wind. Rhahi selling down that carbon and letting that happen in some way. Again, it's hard to keep on top of that completely, and with DT already securing the silicon, it is slightly less important to heavily deny this power. It is interesting that DT has chosen this particular tile allotment. Okay, he has switched out of that combo tile into a second silicon, probably moving into glass. Indeed he is. Should make him good money. Glass would have been a nice market for Rhahi to move into at some point. Probably could have made that transition out of the reactors into glass sooner than the move into the farms, but it's still fine. Nice EMP onto that food. But really, what Rhahi needs is to get this upgrade done soon. DT's upgrade much further away on the other hand. Yeah. Not sure about how I feel about that Goon placement and that EMP. Normally with EMPs, to defend, you goon the further in tile, just so, you know, fewer periphery buildings get hit by the collateral damage. And Rhahi had already done this thing once before with the goons farther out. Rhahi letting the cold fusion auction go for fairly cheap is perfectly fine. She doesn't have a great way to get into water herself. Well, I mean, she's not into a ton of water. And DT is the scientist, so he doesn't necessarily want to be in water. But if she's going to do that, she should really drive the water price up somewhat. Because that is just going to be steadily climbing at this point. Right. And at this point, I think we're seeing the consequences of Rhahi using her claim returns quite that aggressively. Want to get that extra farm down, which is nice. Although she doesn't quite have the water to sustain that. But it does leave her with this single tile out here. Even if she did have the extra claim return, she cannot return tiles with a goon squad on them. So maybe just not planned out quite that well. Instead, if the tiles left here maybe, we'd have a nice pair to work with, even if the initial transition would have had to come a little later. Both players have managed to get themselves stuck at HQ3 for a while. DT is able to upgrade to HQ4 at any point, just needs to sell out of those electronics, or he doesn't. Meanwhile, Rhahi does not have that sort of thing going for her. She'll be there soon, but still has managed to stall out quite a bit, not getting enough off of the power, and then just getting a little outmaneuvered in the markets. Alright. Both players up to HQ4. At this point, it is hard to deny that DT probably has a pretty solid advantage. Electronics coming out for Rhahi. She does have the inputs to that covered. They're fairly cheap, but it's still just not all that profitable. I guess it's easier to get into than any other market. Chems, she would have to get down the reactors first, which means she'd have to correct her water problems first. It's just all a little awkward. Water engine, not particularly impactful for either player. Again, going very cheaply. DT making sure to keep that high water down. Auto selling it for the moment is interesting. I would think he'd want to keep some stockpile of it, because that could potentially get into a very weird spot with cold fusion later. But it's fine for now. DT going into a pleasure dome. That is something he likes to do on Mars. I'm always skeptical. In a Nomad versus Scientific matchup, there's not a ton of population coming from either of the HQs. On the other hand, none of these markets are all that strong. Pick up VR and that's a solid $150 building. Although it is a building that does consume 1 power.
The black market is open for business.
What is DT doing with power? 2.85 there, plus 2 water. Not really good enough. So once he hits HQ5, that's really only 4.05 spare power. And that's not enough to cover your HQ5 buildings. Anyway, Rhahi does manage to get to HQ5 before DT. Partially due to not getting into all these extra advanced buildings, and partially just because Nomad as opposed to Scientist. DT not all that far behind though, and he is just making money somewhat easier than Rhahi. Because that's just what scientists do. No patent lab up yet for either player. It is... okay, Rhahi going for a optimization center, disguising it as a pleasure dome. And now scrapping out of it and putting down a patent lab. Okay. Patent lab should be useful for her. Something like slant drilling would be excellent for these tiles. Would also help with the water somewhat. Not all that important. Something like carbon scrubbing could also be useful. Thinking machines definitely would be useful. Teleportation, moderately useful. I mean, without pirates or magnetic storms, it's not the biggest deal. But it does ensure that A, if an auction comes out, nothing too weird happens with these remote producers, and B, that DT has to micromanage his debt a little less, not having to watch out for all the debt that is accrued while these things are not shipping in if he does not maintain the stockpiles. Anyway, what is Rhahi going to patent? Superconductor, always a fine choice. She is going for superconductor. Okay, she does connect up the geo. Very nice. Did return the water to do that. Not a problem. I really do think thinking machines is the top priority though. DT agrees with me and he's going for that right away. He is going to beat Rhahi to that by a considerable margin because he is a scientist. Again, off-world's just going to be very strong this game. Even when oxygen goes out of control, food is a very solid launch. And the price just isn't going to go too far in any direction. With optimization centers already down for both players, and with one player being a scientist. Where is this spy? On the optimization center. No, that was already there. So it's on this quarry area, which is fine.
Optimization center is ready. Time to start improving everything.
I'm really not sure why both players... okay, only DT is auto-selling food. Probably neither player should be. At least neither player is auto-selling oxygen. And for the moment that is the more relevant resource. And neither player producing enough oxygen to make that a viable long-term launch. So food is going to be a thing to plan around. Interesting. Oh, I see. The slowdown strike. Guaranteed. Rhahi picking up thinking machines. That's a very nice move from her. Just squeezing that in by a few seconds. DT not realizing that this pleasure dome is a patent lab. Which is well done. Not necessarily the most obvious of hiding spots. Though DT probably should have realized, based on his pleasure dome's income not going down very much, that this couldn't be a pleasure dome. Oh well. Rhahi definitely has an opportunity to switch this into an off-world if she wants. Does have that one launch bonus, but that would be susceptible to these slowdown strikes, and it would not be making use of her thinking machines. So, not necessarily what she wants to do. Although it's a definite option. Since I still don't think DT has realized that that's a thing. DT going into the off-world first. Rhahi does know it's there. Again, not much you can do with this black market, except just drop slowdown strikes. Okay, Rhahi also going into the off-world at... no, not at the colony. Over here. Not sure I love that. There's no goon on the tile. And I'm honestly very tempted to say that with a black market like this, thinking machines is less important than having the goon down.
Let the planned obsolescence begin.
But we'll see. Rhahi should have an easier time getting into a second off-world than DT does, and that will be her main advantage.
Black market is open for business.
As well as thinking machines, of course. Please start your launch, Rhahi. Please. Pretty please. Rhahi. 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 Okay, anyway. DT's off-world. Turning away at this launch. You know, the bubbles blowing right through the launch site. No problem at all. These, engineers, these astronauts, know what they're doing. Not fazed by a little, vision obscuring nonsense.
The engineers have advanced our production.
I'm not quite sure what the deal was with the transition into and then out of food. I guess Rhahi doesn't have quite enough water to sustain that food, but still. And I guess glass is a reasonably strong market. VR auction. Oh, I'm a bit sad that this is actually becoming a pleasure dome. And I don't understand the mutiny on the pleasure dome. I mean, she did win VR, so that is something. But at the same time, it does open up her off-world to the mutiny. So it's a little bit odd. DT going into the second off-world first. I was saying earlier that Rhahi's main advantage was the possible ability to get into that second off-world sooner. Hasn't been happening. What she does still have is probably an edge in optimizations. We can check this here, no need to go to charts and graphs. Good optimizations there. Again, probably going overboard on electronics. No electronics consumption from the colony. And both players have most of their advanced buildings up, so this just isn't really going to get much done long term. Meanwhile, DT going heavy steel helped him get this up faster. But only now starting to get into the oxygen and the food. Oxygen still the launch for the moment. Food catching up. Rhahi finally getting her second off-world started. Going under the goon here. I'm not sure I understand that. I mean, it's not consistent with the first play of having this thinking machines off-world. Either you keep both of them thinking machines, or you go for an aggressive play here, or something like that. In this case, it just, yeah, leaves a very easy target for the slowdown strike.
The engineers have advanced our production.
Okay, scrapping out of it, putting another goon down.
Off-world shipment launched. Look at all the money.
And this is all very awkward, and I think it's mostly serving to slow Rhahi down. Meanwhile, DT does have both his off-worlds online. A bit behind in the cache, but once this off-world is completed, that should even out. Optimization choices have been keeping Rhahi in things for the moment, but it is getting a bit harder for that to be sustained.
Successful off-world shipment. Make room for the profits.
I guess it makes sense, DT going for water here and reactors out there. Silicon tiles weren't really getting all that much done, neither were the carbon tiles. This lets him actually sustain a few more reactors. but it is just a little bit weird. Alright, Rhahi's starting to get aggressive against the goon squads. Maybe realizing she needs some sort of edge to catch back up here. Maybe feeling like she's falling a bit behind, knowing that DT does have the two offworlds. So that one is spied and that one doesn't have a hologram. But you can't afford to keep popping goons with EMPs. I guess one thing Rhahi does have going for her, eventually she'll finish breaking through this. I don't think DT, well, DT might buy this 30 to get goon too, probably will. And the mutiny goon is just going to be far too late to be effective. Rhahi and D debt now, down quite a bit in the stock game, and things are just slipping further and further away. 32k for that VR auction, probably pretty significant overcommitment. I'm not sure what soul that came on. Let's say it came on soul 5. That's what, 700 seconds of an extra $50-ish dollars maybe? I guess that pays to the 35k. But at this point Rhahi has been needing to pay off some debt, and that has accrued some interest. It's all made things just a little more awkward. Rhahi muling water. That is useful, I guess.
Off-world shipment. Make room for the profits. Optimization routine successful.
But in a lot of ways, this game feels quite similar to the first game. Rhahi with an opportunity to do things like crash out power and do better life support early. Not quite pushing that hard enough, although this time she did found with enough debt that it was going to be hard to make power money, and that's a good reason to be reluctant to force it. Maybe with a better HQ1 exchange on that electronics, she would have been ahead by more, maybe would have been fine, but didn't quite end up that way. DT should be in position to clean this up. Double mutiny on the food. DT just going into so much water. Because all the rest of his tiles just aren't useful enough. So might as well make them all life support.
Successful off-world shipment.
And that is just a result of him not using these optimizations quite right. At least I feel like the water optimizations came too early, the food optimizations came too late. Although, even with these prices, oxygen did stay the launch, just because it's kept rising faster off-world than food, which is interesting. In any case, we're just waiting for this to end. I mean, I don't think giving a free network virus to anyone is particularly useful. I mean, because the big thing is you also need to find the goon, and a lot of other things along those lines. You don't necessarily want to bounce the network virus, because then there's a decent chance you'll have a target that is vulnerable to that. especially early on in a 1v1. If your opponent is a scientist, there's a decent chance they're making a fair amount of money early, so they can just manipulate the markets to hurt you. What DT is referring to is that in our last practice session I went like 5-1 against him. But if you look at the practice sessions before that, I went something like 1-15 against DT, so not great, not great. I mean, I feel like the free network virus is just too specific a thing. And scavengers just really also don't need a buff. Right. So, the final scores on both groups ended up remarkably similar. DT with 7 wins in Group A, Rhahi 6 wins, Cubit 4 wins. They are going to all advance to the knockout stage. Gameslayer with 2 wins, Urine with 1 win, unfortunately falling out. Group B, Cat 7 wins with the number 1 seed. I have 6 wins, I'll be the number 2 seed. PB with 4 wins, number 3 seed. Kanto 3 wins, falling out of it. Ryak, unfortunately not winning a game and not making it through. So our matchups for the quarterfinals. We have Blues versus Cubit, and we have Rhahi versus PB Head. Should be 2 good matches. The other thing about giving the scavs free network viruses, they might have a bit of a harder time doing that network virus abuse of their opponent, since they're probably not making quite as much money. But yeah, you don't want to give them that tool. Despite the Thinking Machines DT just making so much more off-world. Entertainment, not really game-changing in either direction. And I do think Rhahi putting up that Pleasure Dome slowed down the off-worlds to an extent where it was not worth it. Anyway,